still down at the church down in
Well,
it's off Washington
located
Square,
at-
right? isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
Judson Memorial Church
Right.
provides us with office space.
Good. There's an
Not-
awful lot of good work there.
We're not a project of Judson as such.
I see. Yeah,
They encourage us.
that's good.
Yeah.
And that bibliography would knock me out. I think it was really good.
Surprised me how well it came out.
Yes, welcome. Welcome very much to Conversations, where it's a pleasure to welcome Paul Chapman. He's the director of a very interesting and important project here in New York called the Employment Project, and he's been at it for a considerable period of time, looking at the effects of the new definitions of work and the workplace, as it were, in the American and, I guess, in the world economy. He's put out an annotated bibliography recently about the literature that addresses this. And Paul Chapman is welcome. It's a pleasure to welcome you to Conversations and to Manhattan
Thank you very
Network.
much, Harold. Nice to be here again.
We've done a couple of programs in the past. We've done one along with Sarah Horowitz, who's also looked at this program. But
Working today, yes.
yes, that's right. But I wonder, maybe you could. It's back a few years, but maybe you could share. We could ground this. We have a whole hour. Maybe we could ground a little bit in your own background, your own personal background, where you were raised and education and so forth. And then we could talk about the Employment Project and then this list of books that you've taken particular attention to.
Well, I'm a New Englander, and I've always loved New England. But I moved to New York in 1979 because I was interested in the work that's being done with merchant seafarers.
Okay.
This is how I learned about the workplace.
Okay.
Because there are, 75,000 ships on the high seas, and they are peopled, crewed, mostly by third world workers.
Interesting.
They're hired in places of high unemployment, low wages. These ships are frequently registered in flag of convenience countries, Liberia, Panama, and so on,
Yes.
where countries that really don't intend to enforce any labor standards on board, so that the exploitation level can be very high on board these ships.
Yeah.
Poor Filipinos, Sri Lankans, Burmese, Chinese, making very little money, as little as $100 a month, working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and not getting a day off for a whole year. And when a ship goes beyond the boundaries of any national jurisdiction, then it's pretty much up to the owner and operator what they're going to do with the crew on board. Some of the ships have been quite exploitative.
Yeah.
So the Center for Seafarers' Rights, where I started.
Oh, good for you.
And
Yeah, all right.
And for 12 years, I was engaged with that, and we were advocating for merchant seafarers and doing individual cases.
Yeah, it's an interesting metaphor in a sense, because labor costs are being arbitraged all over the world now as part of the globalization pattern, and that might have been a model in a certain sense for what was to follow for others. And I wonder the dilemma of trying to deal with an international context for what is a world which sees sovereignty as at the nation-state level. That's something you've been,
That's
the
right.
globalization process you've been aware of for some while.
Yeah, you picked that up quickly. This was really a little microcosm of the global workplace.
Right.
Because crew could be hired anywhere,
right,
and fell outside of the jurisdiction of the nation state.
Yeah.
So, and frequently the workers were deceived into thinking they were getting better conditions on board. Cruise ship crew, for example, were sometimes shown the pictures of cruise passengers' quarters and told, this is the way you'll be living.
Really?
And when they got on board, they were put down in the bowels of the ship.
Yeah.
Down with the,
I don't think it was rats. Yeah, it used to be in Captain Bligh's day. Yeah.
Under rather onerous working conditions.
Yes, right.
And so I remember a lot of them would come to us and say, this isn't what we contracted for. What do we do now? Part of the problem was, though, they had paid under the table to get the job.
Right.
And in order to pay off the loans that they'd gotten from their uncle, who may have mortgaged his house in order to get them this money, in order to pay it off, they were sort of held hostage to the income that they were getting from the ship, no matter how little it was.
That is a pattern that has relevancy to the globalization process now, isn't it? Yeah.
When we talk about sweatshop workers, I know very well the kind of pattern based on my experience with merchant seafaring.
How had you gotten interested in that? Had you been a seafarer, or
my grandfather used to do welfare services for merchant seafarers in Boston, and so did my father.
Runs in the family.
It runs in the family.
Good for you.
Back in 1920, he was working in Boston advocating for seafarers. So I came by it that way.
Kept up the family tradition.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. Okay, and then you've branched out now in the employment project. Are you still doing that? Are you still concerned?
No, I do a little bit with merchant seafarers, but my primary concern is the general working conditions of American workers.
American and world, or American?
Well, I've concentrated primarily on America.
Plenty of problems there.
There's enough.
Right,
There's enough
right.
to deal with
Right.
here. I was teaching a course in economic justice, and in the course of that curriculum, it occurred to me that work has changed so radically in the lives of people in the last 20 years.
Oh, it absolutely has a sea change.
Sea change, and yet the rhetoric remains much the same, as if you could only, put yourself to it,
Yes.
you could get a good job,
Yes.
make a living, get enough money for health care and transportation and so on. And that's not necessarily the case, but still, policy is based on that old paradigm,
Yes.
even though circumstances have frequently changed.
Absolutely. Hey, so you were teaching. Were you teaching?
I was teaching in a seminary
Yes.
in Hanover, New Hampshire.
I see. Now, had you had some educational background or
Well,
divinity
I've-
studies?
yes, yes.
Maybe you could just touch on that. You
Okay,
studied
well-
divinity? I mean,
Yes, I have a degree in theology, and I have a doctorate in human rights.
a doctorate in human rights.
Human rights.
Very good. I didn't
Okay.
know there was. That was.
There is such a thing, yes.
Yeah, where did you do that, if I may?
I did that at the New York Theological Seminary. I wrote a dissertation on the human rights of merchant seafarers.
Good for you.
Preparing
Good
myself
you.
for this job.
Yeah, okay, really good. Okay,
Yeah.
right. So it's Dr. Paul Chapman.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Okay, yeah.
We're known better by what we do than by what we say about it.
All right,
okay?
thank you very much. Yeah, but anyway, so we can go, and you started this employment thing, and you're looking at, and there are some real problems, you say, over the last 20 years or so, that there's quite a big literature, or there's quite a literature growing up now, and the issues
there's
that
a lot of
still
literature.
need to be addressed.
It's very difficult for people in our economy who are here reading the headlines all the time about what a booming economy we're
Right.
having.
Dow just went over 10,000.
And
yeah.
everybody I know says maybe it's a booming economy, but I'm out of it.
Mhm.
It's not booming for me.
That's interesting.
And
yeah.
and so they feel maybe I've done something wrong. If only I'd
Yeah.
done this or done that,
Yes.
perhaps I'd have a better job.
Yeah.
But we're finding people all up and down the economic scale are saying the same thing, because whether you're in a high-tech industry or whether you're just doing a McDonald's job, the insecurity, the uncertainty is similar. Of course, the wage gap is huge, but our whole job scene has been undermined. There's no longer the permanence and accountability that there used to be.
Yeah, and that's going to have sociological implications in the long run.
Yeah.
But why it is, you think, our president just got to pass on his personal indiscretions and so forth, largely because they are saying that everybody is happy because the economy is doing so well, unemployment's down to 4% or 4.2%, inflation's down, it's doing so well. I just spent hours listening to Lawrence Summers last night talking about the Social Security, and that this is such a tremendously beautiful period where we're getting rid of this, we're coming into a surplus in the national savings accounts, and everything is great. And all those people are saying everything's so well, but you're saying that masks the political reality that people feel, or is there some free-floating angst in there?
There's a
or
great deal of ambiguity in this issue. I think the victims are supporting the system that victimizes them.
You think that? Okay.
And I think there's an increasing realization that something is really seriously wrong.
Okay.
But I don't think it's gelled enough. There's not an ideological change.
Mm-hmm.
But people are saying, no, there's something wrong. We know we're working much harder.
Yes.
We know that our spouse has to work in order to make ends meet.
Didn't used to be that way.
It didn't used to be that
Yeah.
way. The statistics we have here, they're available, showing that how many more hours. I think the average household is now working 15 weeks more per year
Really?
than 20 years ago. That's in Juliet Shore's. Well, that's in Michelle, the State of Working America.
Okay, yeah,
It's
right.
published
That's
this
one
year.
of the books that you
Yeah,
highlighted in
Bernstein
your
Michelle,
annotated bibliography. Yeah.
And it's 50. The average household is working 15 weeks more per year just to make ends meet.
Than they did at some period in the past.
That's right,
Right.
25 years ago.
Yes.
Yet, the total household income is still not as high as it was in 1989, even with that extra work. So although people still have money, and partly they have money because of credit cards, the credit card debt is high. We're spending today what we're earning tomorrow.
Personal bankruptcy is up, I think.
So consumer confidence seems to be up.
Yes.
Consumer bankruptcy is up very high.
Yes.
1.5 million people a year are declaring personal bankruptcy.
So much is that? I didn't realize. Okay,
Just about that high.
Yeah.
So we have still the possibility of buying the new TV, but it's very tenuous.
Yes.
It's not nearly as secure as it was.
So
people are still engaged in the economy in an active way, but not nearly as confident about it. And I think there's a general awareness, although it doesn't happen out of Wall Street, that Wall Street, well, it does. There's hardly a reputable economist anywhere that says the bubble's not going to burst sooner or later. That it's that people are putting much more trust in stocks and bonds than is warranted by the history of that and by the definition of what it means to be in the stock market. So we're in for something different. And I think people have that sense. So it's a very important question. How come people are supporting a system which right now it seems to be pleasant, but they know there's a storm ahead for the most part.
As Bette Davis said, we're in for a bumpy ride in one of her films.
Or
maybe you feel that could happen, and that would be. But it has been a long period of expansion.
It has. It's been
inordinately long. Mr. Clinton is given a pass on his things because of the economy is in such great shape. They say.
To some extent, I think the media convinces us of this truth, even if it's not so.
Even if this untruth,
even if it's
spinning,
untrue. Patriotism kind of requires that we believe that what's happening is really wonderful.
Right.
And yet, when we probe the individual lives, as we do in the Employment Project, we don't probe them. They come to us and say, it's not working for us.
Maybe you could talk a little, before we get into the bibliography, maybe you could talk about the Employment Project, when you got it started and what was involved. And
well, as I told you, I came to the realization that work was different from what it had been when I was 20 years younger.
Yes.
And still, the language was the same, and that bothered me a great deal because I thought the policymakers were not facing up to the new reality that people were working longer and harder, that they were having more trouble finding jobs. What's the average high school and college graduate today can look forward to 15 jobs? We have people...
Is that true? Is that you know this
15,
more than I do?
Well, college, a career track, I think they could anticipate 15 jobs. Jobs that last more than 2 or 3 years are increasingly unusual.
Yeah, right. And you're almost suspect if you've been on the job too long, right?
True.
Amazing, right, yeah.
Somebody's pointed out to us that they took their resume into a human resources person. They'd been at a job 8 years, and the human resources person said, what's the matter? You stayed in the job 8 years? Don't you have any ambition?
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
that is really interesting.
That's really scary because when you and I started, we expected pretty much that our jobs would last. Well, we'd be on a career path, but we'd remain within the same career. Now, young people can expect to change careers totally.
Yeah, right.
You may have been a professor of geology or geography, but now it would have advanced. Now you might have to, drive a truck in between.
Well, I hope not, but anyway, do
but that's the kind of thing.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing, and it might be all right. That might be all right for there's different personalities. People are different, and there's some people who are like grasshoppers. They jump around, and there's entrepreneurial. They're quick to make a quick turning, and they make turns and everything. But for the mass of the population, on a micro level, this insecurity and those looking for new positions is generally forced or of necessity. And I think there's going to be that condition sociologically is going to perhaps undercut the faith toward the sense of loyalty to a corporation that traditionally has been part and parcel of the employer-employee relationship, and the tie to the job in almost terms that are very, very sacred, not sacred, but sanctum. They believe in that very strongly.
That's right.
That's likely to be undercut by the people in a sociological sense.
And a lot of people don't. They want the kind of security. They want a loyalty. They want to develop a skill within a particular job, and would stick with that job at length, even if it didn't pay as much.
Right.
One of our books that I've even brought a copy of it says that people were working in a furniture factory because it was making high-quality furniture.
Right.
They weren't being paid very much, but they and they knew that.
Mm-hmm.
But the job security, the skill that they could develop, and the relationships that they could nurture among their fellow workers kept them at the job.
Yeah.
And now that furniture factory is now closed,
Yeah.
and those people, some of them are actually on the street.
Yeah.
But that kind of permanence and loyalty has been
Yeah.
undermined. So the employment project,
Yeah.
to continue the theme, is trying to work with individuals who are in the job search process.
Yeah. Or have been downsized.
Who
or
have
whatever
been
the term-
downsized,
Yeah.
or who have just find themselves bewildered, don't have the computer skills that seem to be mandatory for so many jobs these days.
Mhm.
So we're providing access to computers so that people can get basic skills, develop a kind of PC familiarity and friendliness,
Mhm.
and who can work on their resume and learn from each other. That we run mutual support, help support in finding a job. Learn from each other where to look, how to look, what jobs are available, and to encourage one another, because it is a discouraging process.
Absolutely.
If you're looking
Sure,
for a
if you-
job and you're
yeah.
not highly skilled, or
if you are.
if you are, and that particular kind of work isn't called for anymore,
Right.
such as captain on a merchant ship. I mean,
Yes,
there are
right.
very few of those
Getting-
employed in this country, and that's
Right.
a high skill developed over many, many years.
Yeah.
What do you do next?
Yeah.
Where do you turn? And if you send out 100 resumes and you don't get a whisper of a breeze
Pretty
back,
discouraging,
it's
yeah.
very discouraging.
Yeah, right. And you sort of have a place for people that are in that
Yeah,
situation.
yeah,
And that's
right.
been countless thousands of people have gone through that process and this churning process that the economy, has put for them. And it's the
neglects.
psychological implications are really very powerful.
Let me just comment, too, on statistics.
Yes.
Anybody can do anything they want with statistics.
Yes,
You can
isn't
play
that true?
all
Yeah.
sorts of games with
Yeah.
statistics. But let me say a word about how the unemployment statistics are actually figured,
Okay.
because it is not the comparison of full-time workers with all those who are not working.
Okay.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the Census, I'm not quite sure, I think it's BLS, looks at a month and takes a particular week out of that month, and then usually a particular day, and checks on how many people are working that day.
And they do that on an annual
They do that
increments?
monthly.
Monthly, okay,
Monthly.
yeah, right.
Now there was one month in which several hundred extra poll takers were hired for that particular Tuesday. So they were all counted as employed that month, even though they were working only one day that month.
Yeah.
So those are those who are working. It may be part-time work. It may be just one day in a month.
Right.
And they're counted as working that month.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's compared with those who are actively looking for work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I'm, let's say, a 60-year-old person and I've taken an early retirement, I'm available to work, but I'm not counted as unemployed because I'm not actively looking for work. If there were a good job out there,
Yeah, you might
I've got
go for it, yeah.
another 20 years of active life.
Sure, right.
I would be happy to have a job.
Uh-huh.
So both the statistics of those who are employed and those with whom it's compared, those who are not employed, are actually skewed. There may be as many as 50 million people who are not counted, potential workers, who are not counted among the unemployed when we talk about 4.5% unemployment.
All right. So, has this way of account keeping, as it were, unemployment, has this changed through time that reflects it, or would this be, if we try to compare it through time, that those were prejudices that were built into the system 25, 30, 40 years ago, as they are today?
Yeah, I can't answer that question.
Just wondered if there's comparison through time.
There's an interesting book that has just come out within a year by a man named Frederick Pryor called "Who's Not Working
Yes.
and Why."
Yeah.
And he goes, and he has a co-author. I've forgotten his name.
Yeah.
But he goes into this comparison of these statistics at some length.
Yeah.
And challenges the federal unemployment figures in this way.
Yeah. The only thing I was saying is because they're lauding the fact that the unemployment is down to, the employment, is down to 4.2, and they're saying this is great in keeping with the Employment Act of 1946.
And these statistics need to be broken down in terms of race and gender as well. we have in New York City as high as 50% unemployment among young black men.
Yeah.
And
I guess the overall is about 8% in New York City.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, it's higher than the national.
It's higher. It's about double the national.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
I generally figure you can at least double the national figures to get to a more realistic picture of unemployment.
And then that may have been the case throughout time and everything, but that we do have, and you noted it, because I was just noting to you, I just happened to think about it 30 years ago, this is 1999, 30 years ago was in the middle of all that Woodstock stuff, that 1960s and everything.
End of the 60s.
And the young people at that time, at least maybe it was just some of the middle class or but nobody was thinking about material realities very much then. There was a great deal of concern with spiritual questions and what's life all about and that sort of thing. Now, the material realities and the economics and the economic values are so much before everyone. By necessity, people are concerned with that, and it's changed, and one wonders if maybe we're going into a cycle where we're going through a process now where 30 years from now, the concern with all of these material things and the concerns that we're, this employment and the economics and might just, maybe it'll go away forever or something. And so people can get on with the important things that are not material.
Bad things never go away
forever. Oh, well, all right, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, I do.
There's a cyclic pattern to these things.
Yeah. I presume that's true.
Well, I don't know if it is. But anyway, the employment project is there. And you brought up before when you were talking about it, something that interested me. You were saying that somebody who used to do good work, like there's a Karl Marx, who was he was an economist, but he was a sociologist, and he made an observation. He made a distinction, I think, between alienated labor, or I don't know where the etymology of job, the word, comes from, or work. But somebody who's at their work, somebody who's a skilled, somebody who's got a great deal of skill involved, a painter, let's say, a Van Gogh or something like that. You can't tear them away from the canvas when they're doing what it is that they're wanting to do. A job has a quality of doing something only for the money.
It's been commodified.
It's been commodified, and that process has been developed very, very acutely in this century. I mean, that process used to be this family farm was the way people lived, and they were involved in what they were doing. So, but the commodification and the proletization or the development has gone. And do you make a distinction between a job or work? And do you think it's possible that the end of jobs, we have one of the books you talk about is Jeremy Rifkin's. He says the end of work. It gets complicated. But it could free people up to be able to be involved in a leisured kind of way with the things that are of the human spirit, that the jobs, they haven't got time to concern themselves with the important things because they're so busy scurrying around doing jobs that maybe technology and automation would be able to take over, as it were?
It's very possible. It's a question of national priorities, isn't it? And economic priorities. But I do like to distinguish between work and a job.
I do, too.
There's work to be done.
Yes, right.
And that doesn't mean we're going to sell our hours to an employer. We say there's work to be done. We all know what that means. There's a world to build, and there's
Teilhard de Chardin said it.
And there's my gifts that I want to apply to to that task.
As a free
Meanwhile,
person,
I have to get a job in order to support the work I want to do.
You have to get a job to get the money so that you can have the freedom to do the work. So the work and the job. I mean, I say the unemployment. That's what I'm trying to say, is that it's an alienating process. Studs Terkel, one of the books that you deal with in there, says that, working can be a very brutish kind of thing that people are submitted to. Henry Ford's line where they had to do one thing for 8 hours a day, for a whole lifetime. It wasn't particularly ennobling necessarily.
That's right. It's when this country began, as I understand it, as I read, the word independence meant not simply independent from the monarch, but independent also economically. That one had the freedom or had the opportunity to develop one's own skills and to support oneself and one's family and household and so on. Right. So independence was an economic term, that one was free. But this included always working for oneself. A small artisanal labor of some sort. The family farm, as you said, 80% of our nation were farmers at one point.
Even as early as this century, it was at least or Peter Drucker says that the largest employment sector was the individual farm at the turn of this century. Second was domestic servants, and now it's changed.
Now it's changed, but in the early days, the idea of selling one's labor wage labor was thought to be slavery.
Yeah, well,
That
wage
was to
slavery is the term that Marx would use, and
That's
others
right.
would too.
But in this country, to give up one's independence and work for someone else
Yes.
was thought to be a kind of slavery
Yeah.
that one would never choose.
Now we laud it.
Well, we laud it if, in fact, the wages are adequate. There's still a clear distinction.
But it still is. I had done a thing. I had been with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and they have a thing, and they said they have a little aphorisms they use and so forth. They have an interesting pattern, but they say a wage earner, no matter how high the wages, is a type of slave.
Yeah, yeah.
Now that's something that comes. You think about it, but most people would not accept that off the. They would find that ludicrous in a certain sense. Am I going to go out and do something and not get money back for it? So this wage slavery kind of notion of human enterprise or human organization is just accepted. Most people, in order to have income to buy shoes and food and so on, have to have a wage-slave relationship to the way things are produced.
You can call it prostitution, too. Selling one's energy, selling one's body
right.
to a system from which you don't directly benefit.
That's right. And now they used to have some loyalty to the company that gave them their paycheck. I was from Detroit, those automobile factories. But now that they're being undercut and they're being thrown out, right. I think the loyalty to the company that the wage slave or the master slave or whatever relationship you want to call it, that is going to be undercut sociologically and maybe politically, particularly if, as you indicated, when and as things begin to go sour.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So the model of in some sense feeling that you're working for yourself is the one to be held up. I think
so too. Is that an idealism that's beyond? If you take that and people will say, well, that's nice, but that doesn't have anything to do. Vincent van Gogh was painting all those beautiful paintings, and he nearly starved because nobody wanted it.
But he was working for himself.
Yes.
I mean, he wasn't working to make a living.
But the aunts and the mothers will say, don't go out and paint and do what you want to do. Do what you must do in order to make your way. And that's part of the moral lesson of the Puritan ethic, perhaps, or of many of the ethics, Buddhist ethic, that if you don't contribute to the production, then you should not be taking from those who have contributed to production. And it's an anti-parasitism that's sort of built into the philosophy of economics or ethics, maybe.
Well,
do you think? Out of history.
Yeah. There's a couple of things to say about that. Within our own economy, there just isn't enough place right now for everybody to make a living by that. There simply are not enough jobs. Now we're talking about jobs for everyone. And so what can the society do?
And it's much worse on a world scale.
Oh, much worse.
Much worse, yeah. The UN studies have shown that. But go ahead, I didn't mean to...
well, if there aren't enough jobs, then we have to develop social policies that provide a guaranteed annual income or some other way for people to live. There literally are not enough jobs in this country for everybody who needs a job. Our economy is structured in order to eliminate jobs.
Well, yes and no, but we're, if I may, Paul, we're tied into our basic grounding in this economy. Basic grounding policy statement is the Employment Act of 1946, and we have been committed to distributing and creating, to the degree, it was almost called the Full Employment Act. They're worried about inflation and things, but it is that we are encouraging the creation of jobs in order to distribute income.
Yes.
Because we have a labor theory of value from theoretical economics, that if you are working, then you're contributing to the thing.
Yes.
That if you are not working, then you're somehow parasitic on it, although we do sort of look the other way for the people who have a viable ownership stake in technological systems who gain dividend payments and stock payments from bonds and stocks and so forth. We look the other way on that because that's all right. But that you must be working in order to, and I say, is that an ethical principle that's built into the human historical pattern of trying to come at some way of living together?
In some ways, I think it comes from a Protestant, the so-called Protestant work ethic, which is neither Protestant nor ethical.
That's interesting. Well, you're from up New England way, right?
Yeah, where it was embraced fondly. But Luther felt that everyone, was given a calling by God and should stick with that calling, and that to demonstrate one's faithfulness, they stayed in that position and did their job their whole life.
Well,
Calvin was a little looser. He felt you could at least change jobs, and if you were successful in that job, that was probably a sign of God's favor. And they condemned roundly what they called laziness.
Yeah.
But what they never looked at was whether there were, in fact, in Puritan England, or subsequently, enough jobs for everybody.
Okay.
And with the Enclosure Act and so on,
yeah, right,
lots of
England,
unemployment.
Yeah, right.
People were being condemned for something over which they had absolutely no control.
Right. Well, that's going on now too, isn't it?
It is. It's really so. They were saying you've got to work in order to justify your existence.
Right, and to not be parasitic upon the
That's
society of people who are working. You're just a lazy lout
That's
if you're
right.
not working.
But there are
and
plenty of people who would long to have a good job, but who can't find a job, no matter how carefully and systematically they're looking. We're dealing with them all the time and helping them.
Well, why don't we just be the devil's advocate? Let me be a
sure.
little bit in a sense. So what about this thing about that if somebody really is up against it, and there are people who say that let them really just feel the pain of what it is not to be, and that if they really hustled, and if they really got out there, and they really did, and they're willing to be not so high-handed about what kind of a thing they're willing to accept, if they begin at that entry level, something or other, if they really work, they would make their way. They could make their way, and the only reason that the people aren't is that they're all a bunch of welfare people who are accepting a handout, and the moral fiber of the society is being undercut, and people are not just pulling their weight. And if they got out there and pulled their weight, they'd find that through time and maybe a little sacrifice, but they would make their way in the world. That's the position that more or less the society says to the individual,
That's right.
is it not?
That's right.
Now,
It's
what's
true.
wrong with that?
Well, the first thing is, as I indicated, there may just not be enough jobs.
Has it always been so, or only now?
Oh, for the last 200 or 300 years, there's just not enough jobs.
Even though there's so much work to be done. We had a frontier.
Well, that's
came
different.
and so
That's
on.
different.
Okay.
There's work to be done, but we're talking about paid work right now.
All right.
And the other part of that is, yes, maybe that person could get a $5.15 an hour job, which is the minimum wage, which means what, $10,300 a year in 40 hours a week, 50 weeks in the year. That's $10,300. Well, I've got a very good cheap apartment, and I pay $9,000 a year for my apartment.
Right.
So if I were making $10,300 and had a family, it would be impossible. It just doesn't match.
Right.
So there may be a certain reluctance to get hooked in to a minimum wage track, and this may look like laziness or living off the land.
But a lot of people tried to avoid the plantation if they could.
Reality says you just can't survive in this city, certainly, on a minimum wage if you're working only one job. Of course, people work two jobs and then they double up at home and so on. But it's not a very enticing picture if you're going to be making less than, let's say, $10 an hour in this
So
city.
what if they say? So what if they'll say then, if you can't find a decent job, then why don't you go out and invent a better mousetrap and become an entrepreneur? A lot of people, like Joseph Schumpeter, theoretically is probably in the saddle now. The stock market and entrepreneurialism. You had Bill Gates. Look at Bill Gates, came out of a garage somewhere, and he just created this thing, or the guys who have Yahoo, and just go out and invent a better algorithm or something. Go out and be entrepreneurial and go out and do it and sing the praise of the entrepreneur, and all the opportunities will be there and everything will be in good shape.
You probably know more about the Myers-Briggs test than I do, right? You've
heard
of it.
I've
this
heard,
is
but I
a
don't know
personality testing. It's for fun. It's would you rather do this or would you rather do that? And it comes up with a kind of personality profile. And if you take the national statistics that projected as to what kinds of personalities we are in this society, only a tiny percentage actually have an entrepreneurial personality.
Well, they're about as rare as Toscanini.
And most of us would rather just do a good job, be loyal, faithful, workers on a job, be participants in a process in which other people make suggestions and we follow, they follow,
or maybe
teamwork.
Yes, perhaps,
and not necessarily be world innovators.
Yeah.
Do a good job. Work hard.
Yeah,
be loyal.
On
be
the
part
large
of a
scale.
team.
Right.
That's not necessarily entrepreneurial. That's beautiful, companionship and dedication and skill.
Yeah.
But the idea that everybody's got to go out there and create their own world is a little bit much.
Well, all right,
unrealistic in terms of our personality profile. That's what I'm saying.
That's interesting in of itself. Although that could be fleshed out a little bit and everything like that, because that is the reigning ethic now with the thing. And it says, if you don't make it here, move over here. Because you become a world of free agents. Everyone's moving quickly, and the people that are of that mind almost begin to try and think that's human nature, and they don't take into account the other people who aren't of that kind of a grasshopper kind of personality. But I wonder also, there's also people, you say that people want to be just team players and all that sort of thing, but there are also people, I think, and it may tie into one of the themes of your bibliography also, is the automation question, is that the automation process is coming to where the work or the activity involved in producing mass-produced goods and services, particularly as we begin to automate and cybernate and algorithms are running things and so forth, the process itself of we're going to have a team to decide if we're going to have a blue box or a green box to sell puppy biscuits, it is inherently alienating the creating of these material things. There is nothing of value that could be done, and the people who don't want to have anything to do with that, a personality doesn't want to be a good human, they just don't want anything to do with it. All they want to do is be able to have the computer and so forth and then live their own life. That's another large personality type that the job is trying to force people to go into doing things which are inherently alienating in and of themselves in the mass-produced economy. Is that part of an equation that we could begin to look at?
I think so.
If we had another way of distributing income or getting income to people?
We're going to look specifically at the bibliography.
Let's do that.
Minutes,
in fact.
Okay. One of the.
Maybe I could show it.
Yeah, I'll hold it up here. This is. This is 24 books. Which is that working?
Yeah, it'll come on. Just hold it, and you'll come.
That's 24 books which we reviewed recently.
Yeah.
A colleague and I, Karen Ho.
Yeah.
And it shows. Rather convincingly how radically the work has changed in the last 20 years. We date it from about 1975, let's say.
Okay, right.
And the final book in our series is a book by Richard Sennett. Perhaps you've had him on your program.
No, I haven't.
But he has written a book called The Corrosion of Character, The Personal Consequences of Work in the New Economy.
Right.
And the corrosion of character, that already hints at
we're
what's
talking
happening.
Around it,
And that the people are no longer even the same as a result of having spent so much time in this new workplace.
Right.
I could illustrate one of the people he's interviewed, actually the son of someone he interviewed 25 years ago when he wrote the book called The Hidden Injuries of Class, says the very qualities of life that I have to exhibit in the workplace are exactly the opposite of what I want my children to know about.
Right.
So that I live one way in the workplace, which is, as you've been saying, kind of jumping from here to here, being aggressive, being entrepreneurial.
Well, nowadays it is because it's what, that's one of the qualities.
And what he wants
free agent kind of
and
attitude.
what he wants of his children is permanence and loyalty. So he said he has one whole set of values in the workplace and another whole set when he comes home and fills his role as a father.
Right, or as a human being.
That's right. That's right. There's a maybe I could read you something
if
from
you wish, sure,
from
you like that one particularly
from Richard Sennett. Well, I found this to be a rather prophetic work, but one of the he interviewed people that work in a bakery.
Yeah.
And he used to know this bakery very well. It was a ethnic bakery. The people worked hard. It was probably a sexist, racist place, but there was a sense of loyalty and accomplishment and skill in this bakery.
Yes.
Now it's the same bakery is completely computerized.
Right.
And people are working there and making lots of bread, but they have no direct relationship to the product.
Right.
They don't feel that they're even important in the process.
Yeah, and that process is characteristic of the modern mass-produced economy and will be so, of the mass-produced things.
In this high-tech, flexible workplace, where everything is now user-friendly, the workers feel personally demeaned by the way they work. In this baker's paradise, as he calls it, That reaction to their work is something they do not understand themselves. Operationally, everything is so clear, but emotionally, it's illegible. They don't understand what they're doing.
Exactly.
Now the bakers make no physical contact with the materials or the loaves of bread, monitoring the entire process via on-screen icons, which depict, for instance, images of bread color derived from data about the temperature and baking time of the ovens. Few bakers actually see the loaves of bread they make. As a result of working in this way, the bakers now no longer actually know how to make bread.
Right, exactly right. Well, that's the same, if I may, that's the same. You go into the guys who work in the fast food places, they don't make the change. But it's a larger metaphor than that, it seems to me, too, because I've had people tell me, and it's verified, that the airline systems of the world, where they have the airline systems of the world, that if it were possible, you can't because it's psychological, almost politically you can't, but it would be safer if they didn't have crews. Yeah, the subways in Paris now have no drivers, computerized. These algorithms and these cybernetic capability of doing the things that have been done traditionally, we didn't have that capability in the past. The fellow Ray Kurzweil, just as the thing, he's working on an algorithm now that will really, it's going to arbitrage these investment possibilities very subtly with huge amounts of information that to make economic decisions on investment that will supersede, it's going to supersede within 10 years, the financial community. So the roles of people that we put so much attention upon, the roles of people in that economic process are going to be done by machines. Can be done by machines. And people and human values or human rights or human values will get ground up in that process, and maybe that system is trying to tell us we shouldn't be having people involved in that. Let the bread machines make those things, free people, and then if the people at home want to make bread in a human kind of way with fellow citizens, in a leisured kind of way, they'd be able to. Is that something, do you think, might be the promise of the time?
It's a beautiful thought in a way, but then we have to change our idea of how wealth is going to be allocated in our society.
Absolutely. Well, if I could, maybe you, because this is one of the books also, and I happened to dig this out. And I said to you off camera, we had just done a program with Mr. Heilbronner, and he agrees. He's done the worldly philosophers. He looked at economics at a theoretical level, that there's something going on. And in the preparation for that, we got out a book. We got a number of here. We can show it here. But this is a book that I particularly wanted that you highlight. It was a popular book, but it was Jeremy Rifkin's book. Maybe you can just come in tight on that here. And that's called, this one is called The End of Work. This was one that was very popular, right? And you did review this one. This is called The End of Work. And I reread this book. I found it extremely, it was written in conjunction or about the same time that Stanley Aronowitz wrote The Jobless Society.
That's right.
And that sort of thing. But The End of Work, it's subtitled The Decline of the Global Labor Force and the Dawn of the Post-Market Era. I found it exciting. Maybe interesting, and I could read one thing out of a chapter I dog-eared last night. And this is Jeremy Rifkin a couple years back. But we are rapidly approaching a historical crossroad in human history. Global corporations are now capable of producing an unprecedented volume of goods and services with an ever smaller workforce. The new technologies are bringing us into an era of near workerless production. So that the worker, we're talking about employment, the technology is responsible for production in a way that just simply has not historically been the case. In the day of Tom Jefferson, a guy would have a hammer, that was his technology, and it took him 8 hours to make a pair of boots. And now that it's an algorithm that runs machines that turn out, it's the technology and non-labor aspects of production which is creating the production, and we distribute all the income according to labor, and we don't have any of the ownership or any other system of distributing income or the unprecedented productive capability that we have to make this earth as an art object in a certain sense, the way it is, that people could participate, but we don't have a way of distributing income other than this labor theory of value.
How are we going to get there from here? Huh?
Well, I don't know. This is something
ideological.
I think it is the
paradigm shift that has
so.
to take place. Right?
I think it's the largest policy issue that's confronting. So I was listening to Larry Summers last night. They were wondering about what they're going to do about Social Security. People are concerned about the baby boomers are coming along now. and that kind of thing. I think it's the largest question that's confronting mankind in terms of how we're going to do it and what it means. And the technology is coming relentlessly.
Yeah,
The technology,
that's right.
and it's superseding us. I mean, Kasparov lost, since the time you and I did the last program, Kasparov lost to Big Blue. And that's a one-way process.
Yes,
Those computers are just getting smarter and smarter
right,
and smarter
right.
and smarter on any idiot savant thing. Parallel processing's coming, and we're going through a thing that has tremendous sociological implications, but we're still buffeting people about in these job roles, and we haven't come to some liberating order, and that's something that we really have to pay attention to.
It's a whole value change that has to take place, isn't it? That we have to see that human beings are important in and of themselves, and not just for the production of competence in our particular limited economy.
Yeah, by the economic criteria. Despite Madonna saying this is a material world, it's a spiritual world, and there are qualities that are more important than those.
They're inseparable in a way, but
yeah.
People are important in and of themselves, and people need to. The world still needs to be created by people, and people need to create themselves and to grow and to develop. It to become kind of part of creation.
Mm-hmm.
That possibility will always intrigue people.
Yeah.
But the whole question of how do you support yourself in the process? Right now, we're still saying, unless you grind out a certain number of things every day, you don't deserve.
That's right. That's
you
right.
don't deserve to participate.
We're still doing this work, this job ethic, really, in a world.
Doing the job ethic, and that's totally unrealistic in view of our new technological possibilities.
Should we? I talked with Mr. Kurzweil, and he thought the dialectic is going to change from one of class, underclass, and owners and workers. It's going to change to those who are in favor of technology and those who are anti-technological in their bias. Luddite, or he said Kaczynski, the Unabomber, might emerge as a real revolutionary hero of saying we've got to stop the technology which is displacing humanity in the all-encompassing important function of producing economic goods and services. And, he said that is a possibility. But that the technology is coming relentlessly now.
It's going to come.
It's going to become. And we're just coming into the point where it's exponential upon exponential, because each jump of the chessboard is doubling now.
Yes.
And it's coming. So what do we do about this, Paul? And how do
I'm
we
asking you.
No. One of the things, if I may say so, the Employment Project is that you have taken into the realm of what you're doing, and I want to really give you credit for that. People who have been suffering from this, people who had a long career and then all of a sudden the rug is totally pulled out for them. They're adrift in a sea of just absolutely uncomprehension and so forth, the difficulty. And you've been a place for that, and I really do congratulate you on the practical. Instead of lamenting these theoretical things we can talk about, you've taken human beings who are in real dire straits and given them hope. What are some of the things that you do? You help them get back on their feet and so forth?
Well, we have support group meetings for people who need to reshape their career and look for jobs. The purpose of these are twofold: to share strategies in how to look for job in today's job market, and also just to encourage one another.
Yeah.
But I'm meeting daily, either by phone or in person, with people who have been hit in the changing job market, and who need encouragement and need ideas, and so. That's a way for us to keep grounded in some of the harsh realities of today's employment situation.
Yeah.
And this, although most of the people I see are not at the top of the economic pyramid, I understand that people at the top are similarly uncertain. They have certainly more cushion in terms of their economic resources. The problem is that most people are only a paycheck or two away from.
That's right.
From disaster,
That's right.
From economic disaster. We buy a lot of things. If you buy cars, you lease the car, and if you can't make your payments, you lose the car.
That's right.
You can't neglect the rent for too long, but you'll be in a lot of trouble. And so most people are close to to, and if they can't find a job right away, they can get very, very, very frightened.
Yeah, you're right, and it isn't just as we say. Some people like to say, well, if you go out and learn your computer skills or you do something, so education becomes a great panacea, but it doesn't work in a certain sense.
No.
When you've got, you're going to teach them how to do a computer, but then there's going to be algorithms which are going to subsume the computer skills into things that are going to be able to be done. And as Mr. Kurzweil said, they're going to supplant the decision-making process of economic decision-making on what's going to be invested where, what is the backup to the bond, and those kind of things are going to be supplanted, and there's a huge industry. So that's some of the people that are at the, quote, top end of the society are going to be threatened, and that angst is going to creep up at a certain level. Some people say, well, the computers are inevitably going to create more new job opportunities and so forth. But one wonders if that is the case. It has in the past. The farmers went in Mr. Ford's factory, but I'm not at all sure that's going to work on a national or an international scale.
What this book, Who's Not Working and Why, by David Schaefer and Frederick Pryor, point out something rather interesting. I think they do a lot with the whole question of cognitive skills, and they say the demand for particular skills at the very high end of the computer level is increasing.
Yeah, okay.
But that the actual education levels of the population has increased much faster than the needs. So most people are required now to take a job below their skill level.
Right.
And so they take a job at a rung lower on the ladder.
Right.
That knocks those people down to another lower.
Right.
So they say there's a kind of bumping effect. So increasingly people are taking jobs further down the ladder, and down at the very bottom they're knocking people right off into unemployment.
Right.
That it's not a question of training.
Yes,
That's what I'm getting.
Right.
You can train forever and ever. The Job Training Partnership Act of a few years ago, which came out of Congress, it may have been well conceived, but it didn't fit our reality.
Yes.
Because it did not result in more jobs or in better paid jobs.
If we're not going to distribute income, if we have a thing, and I've got a chart, I didn't bring it in, but I have a chart that would show the input of labor as opposed to all other aspects, capital, land, structures, patent, all the other things, and that it's gone from Tom Jefferson's day, it was 10% was something other than labor. They had to cut down most of those trees with a lot of labor, but it's gone to where it was 10%, and that's gone up now to where the actual production, and again, in the mass-produced economy, the vast majority of it, what accounts for the production, if it were competitively measured, is not labor. It's non-labor things. But the ownership of all of those non-aspects of the non-labor aspects of production are owned by a relatively minuscule number of people at the top. And the concentration of wealth on a national and an international scale is just becoming absolutely unsustainable, particularly since you're going to have a way for people to, if you have a black box that is a material production system or something, and it can turn out an endless amount of stuff at the end, automated or something like Sara Lee does in your bakery analysis now, the company. They can turn it out, but you're going to have people that ultimately are going to have the wherewithal to buy the things that are coming out of there. You have to have demand as part of an economic concern. And what are we going to do if we're locked into this pattern that we have now? And our political leadership seems never to address the issue that I can see.
There's just no reality at all in the legislative field about what's going on. Let me illustrate it.
Right.
What
We've
you
got
just
about
said.
4 or 5 minutes left.
80% of the nation were engaged in farming, probably about the beginning of this century.
Yes, it was.
Now 2%.
Right. But tremendously productive.
Producing
enough for the world.
Much more.
Yes. Yeah, to produce for the world.
And I think a machinist did a study that said 2% of all the manufacturing in the world, 2% of the people would soon be able to do all the manufacturing in the world. Service industries can likewise be automated.
Oh, absolutely.
You're saying the financial...
Yeah, even the financial decision-making is going to be automated.
So there's no more jobs.
Yeah, that's what he said, the end of work or a jobless future. Yeah. Now, how are we going to distribute income if we're not going to do it by labor?
So we've got to develop enough consciousness amongst the people of this new reality that even Congress will learn that we have to make a change. It has to be government. That's the genius of these people that are in this book. Again and again and again, they said, entrepreneurial skills are not enough. We cannot pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We've got to have leadership from the governments to lead us into a new era, because we can describe the problem and we can advance various solutions, but unless government intervenes, we can't, for example, close the almost obscene wage gap.
Yeah, and it's going to become unsustainable.
Galbraith has a book called Created Unequal.
Yes, right.
In which he says, unless the government intervenes to help establish structures that will rebalance the distribution of wealth, that we're in for dismal times ahead.
Yeah, right. Well, Galbraith is a really good voice, and he's putting things out. God bless him, you know. Too bad Wassily Leontief just passed. I'm sorry. I think we have to have something at a theoretical level. I think it's at a theoretical level. I'm really glad there are people doing all kinds of things to sort of practically deal with people who are suffering under this. But I think we need a new economic theory. Keynes doesn't work, and Schumpeter, and our traditional Marxist doesn't, and our traditional way of thinking, which all of our political leadership is all based upon this idea of the Employment Act of 46, getting everybody employed. It's not going to work. We need to have visionary leadership, not only in the Congress, but I think probably ultimately at a political level it would have to be almost presidential. There would have to be somebody who would take the idea, voice it, articulate it, and bring forth a new thing. And it would be, if they could find a pattern. My own thought, for whatever it's worth, is that there should be a dissemination of ownership as a way of distributing income, rather than it being just 2% of the population. It should be a general proposition that most income comes to people by a viable holding of ownership of a technologically based system, freeing them to do what it is they want to do, but having the material wherewithal to be able to live a good life. That's my thing. And Louis Kelso had a theoretical basis for that. That's mine. There are others. Some people think we should tax the well-to-do and distribute it by government. But the government certainly has an important role.
There's to come back almost to where we began, I think that there is an increasing discomfort among people, even though they still affirm our national economy. Still there's increasing discomfort that something's not working.
Oh, absolutely. There's something
as
amiss.
That yeast rises and the awareness develops amongst the people, we've got to find a new system. This will be the fertile soil out of which a new value system can arise that will result in some solutions. Let's hope.
Well,
otherwise we're in for just
we're in for a bumpy ride or worse.
The music's going to stop.
I want to congratulate. We're going to let them have your website at the end down at the church here in New York, and thank you, Paul, for all the work you've been doing at a practical level and so forth. And I also would put in a good word for public access. This is free here.
So
this is one of the sort of venues for the human spirit that is not commoditized, and that is something that should be protected. Those venues that are not going to get gobbled up by that.
Too much privatization is taking place.
Well, it can be, but we should have some pattern that includes privatization, including people in that pattern. But anyway, it's a big question. I want to thank you. Thank you very much for all your work over the years. And I'd remind you in the cable audience, your pleasure to have the perception of Paul Chapman. He's director of the Employment Project here in New York. We'll give his web address at the end. And this interesting bibliography, they could be in touch with you, and you can follow up on it. And we thank you for viewing. We ask you to view it again. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it for now. Again, Paul, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Until next time, then. So it's a big subject, to put it mildly. But it's really something that's going to have to be. And you know, I was listening to Mr. Summers, I listened to Alice Rivlin, I listened to all these people, you know, but I don't find anybody who sort of says it. I thought that Jeremy Rifkin book said it pretty clearly, you know.
But it is such a big problem that I think it does have to rise out of the fabric. You know,
maybe perhaps so,
you know, it can't.
Well, I think the media.
It won't come from up here.
I think the media is a good place. Like here, Access particularly. This is the end. This is Hyde Park Corner of media, and there's a place where people from responsible positions could come in, talk about it, and then go back, and they have to administer their institutions responsibly and so forth. But when you've got a